Lanterns of the Hollow River tells the haunting tale of a village cursed by its dark past. Each year, glowing lanterns drift down the river, carrying whispers of the drowned and the damned. When a young woman discovers that the lights are not offerings but warnings, she unravels a chilling truth. The river is alive, feeding on grief and fear. As shadows rise from the waters, she must choose between breaking the cycle or becoming another soul claimed by the depths. A story of sacrifice, cursed waters, and the thin line between memory and haunting. The evening air was thick with the scent of damp earth and riverweed as Elias stood at the water's edge, his hands steady but his eyes restless beneath a furrowed brow. Around him, the hollow river stretched out like a dark ribbon, its surface dotted with the soft, golden glow of lanterns bobbing gently in the current. Each lantern was a beacon, a fragile vessel holding the souls of the drowned souls that, if not duly appeased, might rise to reclaim what was theirs. Elias reached into the basket at his feet and pulled out the first lantern, its glass casing warm against his calloused fingers. His eyes traced the flickering flame inside, steady yet alive with a strange, unearthly light. He lowered it carefully into the wooden boat that creaked softly as it rocked with the river's slow pulse. Beside him, Ada watched intently, her dark hair swept back by a cool breeze that carried with it the faint murmurs of the river's restless past. "Father," she said softly, stepping closer, "do you think the souls are restless this year?" Elias's jaw tightened, and he did not answer immediately. Instead, he glanced toward the far bank where more lanterns floated like fallen stars, some flickering unevenly as if struggling against an unseen wind. "We must do our part, Ada," he said finally, his voice low and steady. "The river remembers, and so must we." The ritual was as old as the village itself, passed down through generations bound to the curse that clung like mist to the hollow river. Each year, the family returned the lanterns to the water, ensuring the souls trapped within could find peace in their ephemeral light. Failure meant the dead would rise, a fate Elias refused to entertain. Inside their modest cottage, Mara moved quietly among the shadows, lighting candles with hands that trembled just enough to betray her calm facade. Her eyes, rimmed with fatigue, flicked toward the window where the lantern's glow seeped through the cracks in the shutters. She whispered prayers for protection, each word a fragile shield against the dark that pressed close. Ada lingered near the hearth, her mind racing with questions she dared not voice aloud. The stories her father told, the warnings etched into the family's history, were they warnings born of truth, or superstitions clinging to the past? Yet the flickering lanterns and the whispers carried on the wind felt too real, too immediate. As dusk deepened, Elias pushed the boat into the river, the lanterns swaying like captive stars tethered to his hands. The water was cold, the chill seeping through his boots and settling deep in his bones. He cast the lanterns one by one into the current, each splash a small sound swallowed by the river's endless murmur. Then something caught his eye. A lantern near the shore flickered violently before its light was snuffed out entirely. The glow vanished as if swallowed by the water itself, leaving an inky blackness that seemed to pulse with malevolence. Elias's breath hitched. He scanned the riverbank, but saw nothing, only the steady dance of other lanterns, their lights unwavering. Yet the absence of that one flicker was a wound in the night, a silent herald of the storm to come. Ada stepped closer, sensing the shift in the air. "Did you see that?" "I did," Elias said, his voice tight. "Something is wrong." The family gathered on the bank, the river's cursed light painting their faces with ghostly hues. Mara clutched Elias's arm, her fingers cold and trembling. "We've done everything as we should," she whispered. "Why would the lantern vanish?" Elias said nothing. His eyes remained fixed on the water, where shadows seemed to twitch just beyond the lantern's fragile glow. Somewhere beneath the surface, the drowned stirred. That night, the river whispered secrets only the lost could hear. And the family, bound by duty and dread, stood on the threshold of a darkness that would test the limits of their courage and the strength of their bonds. As the lanterns of the hollow river continued to glow, their light was no longer just a beacon of hope, it was a warning. The ritual had begun, but so had the unraveling. The lanterns bobbed like restless stars, and the river waited. The evening air hung heavy with a damp chill as the last light of day slipped behind the thick trees bordering the hollow river. Ada stood at the riverbank, her slender frame wrapped tightly in a worn shawl, the edges fraying from years of use. Her dark eyes scanned the water's surface, where the lantern's tiny beacons of ethereal glow floated quietly, bobbing gently on the river's slow current. But tonight, the lanterns seemed fewer, their light weaker, flickering with an uneven pulse as if struggling against some unseen force. A faint, almost inaudible whisper drifted on the breeze, threading through the reeds and curling around Ada's ears. She shivered, not from cold, but from the eerie sensation that the river itself was speaking, murmuring secrets meant only for those who dared to listen. She strained to catch the words, but they dissolved like smoke, leaving only the echo of their haunting cadence. Behind her, the family home sat nestled among the moss-draped oaks, its weathered boards creaking faintly in the evening wind. Inside, Mara sat by the kitchen table, her thin fingers wrapped around a flickering candle, its soft glow casting long shadows that danced across the worn wood. Her pale face was etched with worry, eyes wide and restless as they darted toward the window overlooking the river, as if expecting to see anything that might explain the unease settling over her heart. Elias moved silently through the dim kitchen, the scrape of his knife against stone barely audible. He sharpened his fishing blade methodically, the repetitive sound grounding him amid the growing chaos in his mind. His deep-set eyes, dark and weathered from years spent fighting the river's moods, stared off into the distance, unfocused but heavy with thought. He knew the signs more lanterns gone meant the curse was stirring, and with it, the restless spirits lurking beneath the water's surface. Ada's footsteps echoed softly on the wooden floor as she approached. "Father," she said, her voice tentative but edged with urgency, "more lanterns are missing. I saw it myself by the river tonight." Elias's jaw tightened. "It's the curse," he murmured, his voice low and rough. "It's waking. We must be careful." Mara looked up, her lips trembling. "Please, Elias, can't we do something? I feel something terrible is coming." He shook his head, exhaustion tugging at his shoulders. "We must wait for the ritual. The river demands its due, and we must not fail." Despite his words, Elias's usual stoicism cracked beneath the weight of his fear. The growing silence between them spoke volumes, a gulf of dread that no ritual could immediately bridge. That night, Ada found herself restless, the whispers of the river echoing in her mind. She confided in Lena, her closest friend, as they met beneath the gnarled branches near the village's edge. Lena's bright eyes, usually full of laughter, held a skeptical light as Ada spoke of the missing lanterns and the strange voices. "Ghost stories, Ada," Lena said softly, though her voice betrayed a flicker of unease. "You know how the village folk get afraid of what they can't see. But what if it's real?" Ada pressed, her gaze fixed on the glimmering river beyond the trees. "What if the curse is more than just stories? Something is happening. I can feel it. Lena hesitated, then reached out to squeeze Ada's hand. Whatever it is, you won't face it alone. Back at the house, Mara's anxiety deepened, her hands trembling as she lit candle after candle, whispering prayers for protection. The shadows lengthened, and the faint sound of whispers grew louder, swirling like mist around the old walls. Elias stood on the porch, watching the river's surface where lanterns bobbed and vanished as though swallowed by the water. His face was etched with grim determination, but beneath it, a storm of fear and guilt raged. The curse was no longer a distant threat, it was a presence, creeping closer with each lost lantern. The night air thickened with a sense of foreboding as the whispers continued, a chilling reminder that the hollow river's secrets were far from buried. The family's fragile peace trembled on the edge of unraveling, and Ada's growing curiosity was the spark that might ignite the darkness waiting beneath the cursed light. As the moon climbed higher, the river seemed to pulse with a cold, spectral heartbeat. Somewhere beneath the surface, the drowned stirred, their lanterns flickering in restless anticipation. The family's burden was heavier than ever, and the shadows whispered promises of a reckoning yet to come. Ada turned from the riverbank, her resolve hardening. The mystery of the missing lanterns was hers to unravel, even if it meant confronting the darkness that Elias feared. The whispers in the dark were calling, and she would answer. The evening air hung heavy with a damp chill as old Tom's footsteps crunched on the gravel path leading to the fisherman's home. The sun had sunk below the hollow ridge, painting the sky in bruised purples and deepening blues. Elias stood on the porch, his lean frame rigid, eyes narrowed against the creeping dusk. Beside him, Mara clutched her shawl close, her pale face drawn with quiet anxiety. Ada lingered just inside the doorway, her dark eyes fixed on the fading river beyond. A sharp knock echoed through the still air. Elias opened the door to reveal the village elder, old Tom, his bent figure silhouetted against the dying light. His thick beard was flecked with grey, and his weather-beaten face bore the scars of years spent battling the river's caprice. In his hand swung a lantern, its flickering flame an unnatural shade of blue, casting eerie shadows that danced like restless spirits along the porch walls. "Evening, Elias," Tom rasped, his voice low and gravelly. "I come with words you must hear." Inside, the house felt smaller under the weight of the gathering darkness. The flickering candlelight barely held back the shadows that pooled in the corners of the worn kitchen. Mara moved silently to tend the fire, while Ada settled at the wooden table, her fingers tracing the grain nervously. Old Tom set his lantern down with a deliberate clink, the flames sputtering briefly as if struggling against an unseen wind. His eyes scanned the room, lingering on Elias with a somber intensity. "The river's restless," Tom began, his voice dropping to a grave whisper. "The drowned grow restless, their lanterns flickering with anger. They do not forget, they do not forgive." Elias's jaw clenched. "I've heard the stories, Tom. Old tales to scare children and keep fools from the water after dark." "These are no stories," Tom replied, leaning heavily on his cane. "The curse that binds your family to this river is older than any of us. It was forged in blood and loss when the flood came and took them all. Those souls are trapped, their lanterns the only tether to the world of the living." Ada's breath caught. She leaned forward, eyes wide, the weight of the elder's words pressing down on her like the cold river itself. "Why are the lanterns disappearing?" Tom's gaze darkened. "Because the tether weakens. Each lost lantern is a soul slipping free. If the ritual fails, the drowned will rise to reclaim what they lost, and those they find will join them in the depths." Mara's hands trembled as she lit another candle, the flickering flame casting a fragile glow over her pale features. "We've done the ritual every year," she whispered. "Why now?" "Because the curse is hungry," Tom said, voice cracking with age and sorrow. "Hungry for balance, for sacrifice." A sudden gust rattled the window panes, and the lantern on the table flickered wildly, plunging the room into near darkness. Mara shivered, pulling her shawl tighter, while Elias rose abruptly, tension radiating from his taut frame. "We'll not let it come to that," Elias said, voice firm. "We've protected this family for generations." But even as he spoke, the lines of worry etched deep into his face betrayed a growing doubt. Ada caught the glance he cast toward the river beyond the window, the river that glowed faintly with the soft, cursed light of countless lanterns bobbing like stars in the night. The room fell silent, save for the whisper of the wind and the distant murmur of water. The chill seeped into their bones, as if the river itself had crept inside to claim its due. Ada's mind raced. The stories, the warnings, they aligned with the strange disappearances, the flickering lights, the restless whispers she'd heard when no one else was near. The weight of history pressed down on her, heavy and unyielding. She knew, deep inside, that the river's curse was more than mere superstition. It was a living thing, hungry and patient, waiting for the moment when the family might falter. As old Tom prepared to leave, he fixed Elias with a final, piercing look. "You must keep your vigil strong. The river does not forgive, and it does not forget." Outside, the lantern's pale light swung gently in the night breeze, casting dancing shadows across the weathered stones. Elias closed the door, the heavy wood thudding shut like a heartbeat, steady but weighted with dread. Ada remained by the window, staring out at the river's glowing lanterns, their soft cursed light reflecting in her wide eyes. The burden of the past, the fears of the present, and the unknown future all converged in that silent moment. Somewhere in the depths, the drowned stirred, their eyes like cold fire watching, waiting, and the river whispered its ancient, terrible promise. The night deepened, and with it, the shadow of the curse stretched ever longer. Ada knew that the coming days would test their family in ways they could not yet imagine, and that the fragile boundary between the living and the dead was thinning, ready to shatter. She swallowed hard, the taste of fear bitter on her tongue, but beneath it a flicker of fierce determination took root. If the curse was a chain forged in darkness, she would find the links to break it, or be consumed by the river's cold embrace herself. The lanterns flickered once more, their ghostly light bobbing softly on the water's surface. The hollow river waited, patient and eternal, and Ada watched, her heart pounding with the weight of what was to come. The river's story was far from over. The heavy quiet of the house was shattered by Ada's sudden gasp. She bolted upright in bed, heart pounding fiercely against her ribs, as the remnants of a nightmare clung to her mind like cold water. Shadows stretched long across the ceiling, cast by the flickering firelight from the hearth below, and a cold draught whispered through the cracks around the window panes. Her breath came out in visible puffs, misting the chill in the air. She sat still for a moment, eyes adjusting to the dark, before slowly rising and padding softly toward the doorway. The house was still and silent, but an oppressive weight hung in the air, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Downstairs, Mara sat hunched over the kitchen table, her pale hands trembling as she lit small candles, their flames flickering anxiously. The soft glow did little to ward off the shadows that seemed to gather in corners, pressing close with cold fingers. Mara's lips moved in a barely audible prayer, words whispered into the darkness, pleading for protection that felt increasingly fragile. The lines beneath her tired eyes deepened each day, a silent testament to the toll the curse exacted on her spirit. She glanced toward the mantel where the family's lanterns rested, each one a fragile beacon of light against the dark, tethered to the drowned souls of the hollow river. But tonight, one lantern was missing. Elias paced near the riverbank at dusk, the sky painted with bruised purples and deepening grays. His weathered hands clutched the worn, leather-bound book of rituals passed down through generations. The river glowed faintly, a spectral procession of lanterns bobbing gently on the surface like restless stars adrift. Elias's voice was low, chanting the ancient incantations that had always kept the curse at bay. But tonight, the lanterns flickered unevenly, their cursed light wavering like a fragile heartbeat. A shiver passed through Elias, not from the chill, but from something darker, more insidious. The river was speaking, its voice a cold whisper carried on the wind, warning of the danger creeping closer. Back inside, Ada joined Mara in the kitchen, the sight of the missing lantern hitting them both like a punch to the gut. "It was right here," Ada said, her voice trembling. "I saw it last night." Mara swallowed hard, fingers tightening around a candle. "The curse, it's not just out there anymore," she whispered. The house felt suddenly smaller, their sanctuary breached by the same darkness that haunted the river. Ada's thoughts raced. If the lantern could vanish from inside their home, what else could the curse take? That night, both mother and daughter were visited by nightmares. Ada dreamed of cold water rising, swallowing the house whole, the drowned reaching out with pale, glowing hands. Mara saw the river's reflection in her eyes, endless and dark, as the lantern's light flickered and died. They woke in the early hours, hearts pounding, the oppressive silence now a suffocating presence. Elias returned from the river to find the family gathered in the hearth's dim glow, faces etched with fear and exhaustion. The missing lantern was a wound in their defenses, a sign that the curse was no longer content to lurk on the river's surface. It was coming for them, reaching into the warmth of their lives and pulling at their fragile peace. Elias's stoic mask cracked just slightly, revealing the desperate resolve beneath. "We must be more vigilant," he said quietly. "The ritual must be done again with greater care." As the night deepened, the cursed light of the river flickered once more, a silent herald of the darkness rising. The family's fragile bonds strained under the weight of unspoken fears and mounting dread. Each lantern lost was a soul slipping further from rest, and with every vanished light, the river's cold embrace tightened its hold. Ada lay awake, staring out the window at the trembling glow of the hollow river. Somewhere beneath that cursed light, secrets waited to be uncovered, secrets that might save them or doom them all. The line between safety and danger blurred, and the vanished lantern was only the beginning. The river whispered promises of terror, and the family listened, caught between the shadows and the fading light. Outside, the wind rose, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and decayed leaves. The lanterns bobbed uncertainly on the river's surface, their light a fragile heartbeat in the encroaching darkness. Elias's chant faltered, a tremor of fear breaking through his ancient resolve. The curse was no longer a distant threat. It was here, inside their home, inside their hearts, and the river's cold fingers were reaching ever deeper. The vanished light had cast a shadow that would not easily lift. Ada's eyes snapped open once more, the nightmare never far behind. She knew that to survive, they would have to face the darkness before it swallowed them whole. But how could they fight a curse that had already found its way inside? The river waited, patient and unforgiving, as the lanterns flickered and faded into the night. And in the silence that followed, The family's fate hung in the balance, swaying like a lantern on the water's restless surface. The attic was thick with dust, motes dancing like tiny ghosts in the slanting beams of late afternoon light. Ada's fingers trembled as she brushed aside a loose plank beneath the floorboards, revealing a leather-bound book, brittle with age and heavy with the weight of forgotten years. The scent of must and time-worn parchment rose to meet her as she pried it free, the cover cracked and faded, embossed with a symbol she recognized from the family's old tales, the twisted lantern, the emblem of the Hollow River's curse. She settled into the cold wooden floor, the lantern's glow her sole companion, and opened the journal, the fragile pages whispering secrets. The ink had faded to a ghostly grey, but the words were still legible, penned in a meticulous hand that spoke of urgency and despair. The entries detailed the great flood that had swallowed the village generations ago, a cataclysm that had drowned souls and fractured lives. But buried within those lines was something darker, a pact made by her ancestors with forces beyond understanding, a bargain to bind the drowned spirits with lanterns, trapping their souls and containing the curse. Ada's breath hitched as she read of sacrifices made and broken promises, of a debt owed that stretched across centuries. Each lantern was more than a light. It was a prison, a tether holding restless souls in limbo. And the family, charged with returning these lanterns to the river annually, were bound to the curse by blood and obligation. A sudden shadow fell across the doorway. Elias's voice, rough and low, cut through the silence. "Ada, that's enough." Startled, she snapped the journal shut. Elias stepped inside, his eyes dark pools of worry and something deeper guilt. "There are things better left buried," he said, voice tight. "The more you dig, the more danger you bring upon us all." "But we need to know," Ada insisted, her resolve hardening. "If we don't understand the curse, how can we fight it?" Elias's jaw clenched. "Some knowledge comes at too high a price. You don't know what you're meddling with." Mara appeared at the foot of the stairs, fragile and pale, clutching a candle as if to steady herself against the mounting shadows. Her eyes, tired and haunted, rested on the journal. "Your father is right, Ada," she whispered. "That darkness has taken too much from us already." Ada felt the weight of their sorrow, the invisible chains of fear and loss that bound them all. Yet beneath it, a flicker of defiance stirred. The journal was a key, a way to unravel the curse and perhaps save them all. But the path it revealed was steeped in pain and sacrifice. Over the following days, Ada pored over the journal, tracing the family's tragic history. She learned of her great-grandfather, a man who had bargained with the drowned to save his village, but had doomed his bloodline in the process. The entries spoke of rituals performed beneath moonlit skies, of lanterns crafted from bones and whispered incantations meant to keep the restless dead at bay. But cracks in the story began to show. There were mentions of lanterns lost, of nights when the curse had surged beyond control, and of family members consumed by madness and despair. Ada's heart ached with the realization that the curse was not just an external threat, was woven into the very fabric of her family's existence. At night, the river's glow seemed to pulse with a malevolent life, the lanterns flickering in erratic rhythms as if warning or beckoning. Ada's dreams were haunted by water's cold embrace and drowned faces, their eyes imploring, accusing. She awoke each morning with a tightening in her chest, the journal's secrets weighing heavily on her mind. Elias grew more distant, his protective walls rising higher. Their conversations became terse, shadowed by unspoken fears. Mara's health declined, her once gentle presence now fragile and fading. The house seemed to close in on them, the atmosphere thick with impending doom. One evening, as the family gathered around the hearth, Ada broke the silence. "We can't keep running from this. The journal shows that the curse started with us. It's our burden to end it." Elias's eyes, weary and guarded, met hers. "And if we fail? If digging up the past only makes it worse?" Ada's voice was steady, though her heart pounded. "Then we fight, because if we don't, the river will claim us all." Outside, the river whispered its ancient song, the lanterns bobbing like restless stars on the water's surface, their cursed light flickering with a cold, unyielding glow. The secrets beneath the surface were no longer hidden, and the family stood on the edge of a dark and uncertain future. The kitchen was thick with the scent of damp wood and fading embers, the low hum of the river just audible beyond the thin walls of the old house. Elias stood by the doorway, arms folded, eyes narrowed as his brother Jeb paced restlessly across the creaking floorboards. The air between them crackled with unspoken grievances and years of resentment. "You still don't believe it," Elias said quietly, his voice tight but steady. "After everything, you still think it's all superstition?" Jeb stopped mid-step, turning to face him with a weary shake of his head. "Elias, I've been away from this place long enough to see the world for what it is. The river's just water. Those lanterns, just old lights, nothing more, nothing more." Elias's voice rose, the years of burden pressing down on him. "They're the souls of the drowned Jeb, the curse that's bound our family since the flood. You think I want to believe in ghosts? I want to protect my family." Jeb's eyes flickered with something like pity, but his tone remained sharp. "Protect them from what? From stories. You're losing yourself to fear, Elias. It's tearing us apart." The tension in the room was suddenly broken by a soft cough from the far corner. Mara sat hunched in her chair, a pale figure wrapped in a threadbare shawl. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the fabric, eyes fixed on the flickering lantern above. Mara, Elias's voice softened as he turned to her, concern etching his features. "You need to rest." She managed a weak smile, but the fatigue in her eyes betrayed her. "I'm fine," she whispered, her voice fragile, just tired. Ada stood near the window, watching the exchange quietly. Her dark eyes reflected the lantern light, a mixture of frustration and fear swirling within them. She had grown increasingly restless these past days, the mysteries of the river and the missing lanterns gnawing at her. Later that afternoon, Ada found herself walking along the muddy riverbank with Lena, the sky a canvas of bruised purples and greys. The water glimmered faintly with the glow of distant lanterns, a spectral procession bobbing gently in the dusk. "Do you really think the curse is real?" Lena asked, her voice low, eyes scanning the quiet water. Ada hesitated, her gaze fixed on the shimmering lights. "I don't know what to believe anymore, but something's wrong. The lanterns are disappearing, and Mara, she's getting worse." Lena reached out, squeezing Ada's hand reassuringly. "Whatever happens, you're not alone. We'll figure this out together." The words offered a fragile comfort against the encroaching darkness. Back at the house, as night fell, Elias stood at the river's edge, the cold water lapping at his boots. The cursed light flickered on the surface, casting ghostly reflections that danced like restless souls. He closed his eyes, chanting the old prayers his father had taught him, hands trembling just beneath the surface of resolve. "Please," he whispered, "let this end." The river answered only with silence, the weight of the curse pressing heavier than ever. As the family grappled with their fractures and fears, An uneasy storm gathered both in the sky and in their hearts. The river's glow promised no peace, only the relentless march of a curse that demanded a terrible price, and the price was rising. The night was thick with mist when Ada slipped out of the house, the faint scent of rain lingering in the air. Her footsteps were muffled by the damp earth as she made her way toward the river, guided by the soft, ghostly glow of the lanterns bobbing on the water's surface. Each flickering light seemed alive, as if pulsing with the trapped souls beneath the river's surface. The family's home, usually a refuge of quiet routine and whispered prayers, felt distant and fragile behind her. Ada's heart thrummed, not with fear but a strange mixture of curiosity and dread. The river called to her an ancient voice she had tried to ignore, yet could never truly resist. She remembered the stories Elias had tried to shield her from, the warnings that slipped from his lips like reluctant confessions. Tonight, she needed to know for herself. What was it about the lanterns? Why did the river seem to hold them and her family in its cold, unyielding grasp? As she reached the riverbank, the cold air kissed her skin with a biting chill. The water, dark and restless, reflected the flickering lanterns that drifted silently, their light casting strange shadows on the tangled branches that clawed at the sky. The whispers, barely audible at first, grew louder, weaving through the rustling leaves and the gentle lapping of the water. Ada strained her ears, catching fragments of voices, some pleading, others filled with sorrow or rage. Suddenly, the water before her rippled unnaturally. A shape emerged, pale and faint, as if woven from mist and moonlight. It was a figure waterlogged and translucent with glowing eyes that pierced the darkness, the drowned. Ada froze, her breath caught in her throat as the spirit drifted closer, its form flickering like the lanterns that tethered it to this world. The cold seemed to seep from the figure, wrapping around Ada's limbs like icy chains. Her toes curled in the mud, the chill biting deep, but she did not retreat. Instead, her eyes locked onto those glowing orbs, searching for meaning, for mercy, for a way to end the endless torment. The figure's lips parted, and a whisper seeped through the night, "Return what was taken." The words echoed in her mind, heavy with unspoken threats, ancient pain, and a demand for restitution. Ada stumbled back, breaking the spectral gaze, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. The lanterns flickered erratically, their light dancing madly across the water's surface. She turned and fled, branches snapping underfoot, the whispers chasing her into the night. Back at the house, Elias sat at the kitchen table, the soft glow of a single candle casting long shadows across his weathered face. His eyes were fixed on the river beyond the window, where the lanterns glowed faintly in the distance. His fingers clenched around a worn wooden charm, a talisman passed down through generations, imbued with protective blessings and desperate hopes. He had sensed her absence, the restless pull that had drawn Ada to the water's edge. His heart clenched with a mixture of fear and fierce protectiveness. The curse was no longer a distant threat, it was closing in, clawing at the edges of their fragile peace. Elias whispered under his breath, a prayer for strength and forgiveness. The river's cold embrace was tightening, and soon the family would have to face the darkness lurking beneath its surface. But for Ada, the encounter marked a turning point, a resolve forged in terror and illuminated by cursed light. She would confront the river, the curse, and the drowned souls, no matter the cost. The night deepened, and the lanterns on the hollow river flickered with restless light, as if warning of the trials yet to come. And in the quiet house, a family braced against the rising tide of dread, bound by blood, guilt, and an ancient debt they could no longer ignore. But the river waits for none, and its cold embrace is patient. Ada's footsteps faded into the distance. But the haunting glow of the lanterns remained an unyielding reminder that some debts are paid only in sacrifice. As the moon dipped behind a veil of clouds, a chill wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faintest echo of a promise. The river is watching, and it will not forget. And somewhere, beneath the dark waters, eyes glowed with an unholy light, waiting for the family to answer the call. The river's cold embrace was only beginning. Night fell over the hollow river with a weight that seemed to press down on the very bones of the small fisherman's cottage. Inside, the air was thick with an unspoken tension. The fragile quiet punctuated only by the crackle of the dying hearth fire and the faint, haunting whispers drifting through the cracked windows. Mara sat huddled near the hearth, her pale hands clutching a worn shawl tightly around her thin shoulders. Her soft features, once full of hope, were now drawn and tired, shadows deepening under her eyes like the dark river outside. The wind picked up, sweeping through the skeletal trees and carrying with it a faint susurrus that sounded eerily like voices whispers from the drowned, murmuring just beyond the threshold of the living world. Elias watched her from across the room, his weathered face etched with lines of worry and exhaustion. He was a man burdened by an ancient duty, stoic yet visibly faltering beneath the weight of ancestral guilt. His deep-set eyes, usually steady and guarded, reflected a storm of fear and helplessness. Each night, the river seemed to grow colder, its cursed light flickering more wildly as if warning of the darkness creeping closer to their home. He clenched his fists, fighting back the urge to scream into the void, to demand reprieve from the relentless torment that had gripped his family. Ada sat silently in the corner, her slender frame tense as she tried to steady her racing heart. The nightmares had become unbearable visions of shadowy figures emerging from the water, glowing eyes burning with unyielding sorrow and rage. Just the night before, she had awoken gasping. The image of a drowned woman's face pressed against her window burned into her mind. The ghostly lanterns bobbed on the river's surface outside, casting a sickly glow that seemed to seep into her very bones. "Mother," she whispered softly, reaching out to the frail figure by the fire. But Mara's eyes remained closed, her breath shallow and uneven. As the house settled into the long hours before dawn, Elias found himself restless, unable to sleep despite the exhaustion that tugged at his eyelids. He rose quietly and moved to the riverbank, the cold night air biting at his skin. The river stretched out before him, black and endless, its surface dotted with the eerie lanterns of the drowned. He held one of the lanterns in his hands, a fragile vessel of cursed light, and, with a heavy heart, cast it into the dark water. The faint glow wavered like a heartbeat beneath the surface, then disappeared into the depths. He whispered a prayer, not for salvation, but for strength to endure what was to come. Back in the cottage, the night deepened its hold. Ada's dreams were invaded again, this time by the unmistakable sound of splashing water and urgent whispers calling her name. She awoke to find the room cold and the faintest outline of a figure standing just beyond the window. Her breath caught in her throat as the glowing eyes of a drowned soul met hers, flickering like the cursed lanterns themselves before vanishing into the night. The terror rooted her in place, but beneath it stirred a fierce determination. She would not let this curse consume them all. Morning brought little respite. Mara's condition had worsened. Her frailty was no longer hidden by the dim light of the hearth. Elias and Ada exchanged worried glances as they prepared a meager breakfast, the silence between them heavy with unsaid fears. The village beyond seemed to hold its breath as well, the usual sounds of daily life muted and subdued under the shadow of the cursed river. Throughout the day, The family was haunted by fleeting glimpses of the drowned ghostly reflections in the water. Distant echoes of laughter and cries carried on the wind. The line between the living and the dead blurred, the cursed light flickering like a dying pulse, threatening to snuff out the fragile peace they clung to. Elias's attempts to perform the quiet rituals that once brought comfort felt hollow, each gesture weighed down by the knowledge that the curse was tightening its grip. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the oppressive tension mounted. Mara's breath grew more labored. Ada's resolve hardened. Elias, burdened and weary, sensed the breaking point approaching. The house, the river, and the cursed lanterns seemed to conspire in a silent countdown to a reckoning. The night stretched on, dark and endless, carrying with it the promise of more haunted nights to come. The family stood on the edge of despair, caught between the cold embrace of the river and the faint, flickering hope that they might yet survive the curse that bound them. And as the lanterns bobbed on the water, restless and unyielding, the question lingered in the heavy air. How long could they endure before the drowned claimed what was theirs? The river whispered, and the night answered. The heavy wooden door creaked shut behind Jeb, the sound echoing through the small kitchen like a gunshot in the stillness. Elias stood by the window, his gaze fixed on the river's dark silhouette. But he didn't turn as his brother's footsteps approached. The air between them thickened, charged with years of unspoken grievances and recent fears. "You're chasing ghosts, Elias," Jeb said, his voice low but sharp, slicing through the quiet. "This curse you cling to, it's killing us. It's tearing the family apart." Elias finally turned, his weathered face drawn tight with exhaustion, eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight. "It's not a ghost, Jeb. It's real. We've seen what happens when the lanterns go missing. The drowned don't forgive." Jeb scoffed, running a hand through his tangled hair. "You and your cursed rituals, always looking to blame something unseen. You're scared, and it's making you blind." Mara sat nearby, pale and fragile, clutching a thin shawl around her shoulders. Her tired eyes darted anxiously between the two men, heart aching as the familiar tension rose once more. Ada stood just inside the doorway, her slender frame tense. The flickering candle flames cast a dancing glow on her dark hair, mirroring the turmoil inside her. She wanted to step forward to bridge the rift, but words caught in her throat. "This isn't about fear, Jeb," Elias said, stepping closer, voice harder now. "It's about protecting what's left of our family. If we don't honor the river, the drowned will come for us all. And if you keep living in this nightmare," Jeb replied, voice rising, "you'll lose us anyway. I'm done with this. I'm done with you dragging us down." The words hung heavy, a sharp blade cutting through the fragile bonds holding them together. Jeb's eyes flashed with anger as he turned on his heel and stormed out, the door slamming behind him. Ada's heart pounded. The man she once admired was now a stranger, a symbol of the division threatening to consume them. She pressed her palms to the cool wood of the door, feeling the weight of his absence like a physical wound. Mara's soft voice broke the silence. "Elias, please, we can't let this tear us apart. Not now." He sank into a chair, his hands trembling as he rubbed his face. "I'm trying, Mara, but with every lantern that goes missing, with every restless night, it feels like the river is pulling us deeper into the dark." Ada slipped out of the house, the chill of the evening air wrapping around her like a shroud. The river called to her, its surface dotted with the glowing lanterns of lost souls, drifting silently in the gathering dusk. She stepped onto the worn wooden dock, the boards creaking beneath her feet. The lanterns bobbed gently, their cursed light flickering uncertainly, as if reflecting her own conflicted heart. Questions swirled in her mind. Was Jeb right to reject the curse as superstition? Or was Elias's fear grounded in something far more real and terrifying? Behind her, the faint sound of the river's whispering mingled with the rustling leaves, a haunting melody that promised both danger and revelation. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply the damp, earthy scent of the water, and resolved to find the truth no matter the cost. But even as determination steeled her nerves, a cold shiver ran down her spine. The curse was tightening its grip, and fractures in the family's foundation threatened to let the darkness seep through. Back inside, Mara sat alone in the dim light, her frail hands folded tightly in her lap. The shadows seemed to press closer, the weight of loss and fear suffocating her. Whispered prayers spilled from her lips, desperate pleas for mercy in a world unraveling around them. Outside, the river's cursed lanterns flickered once more, their ghostly glow a reminder that some bonds, no matter how broken, could never be escaped. As the night deepened, the family's fractures grew more pronounced, setting the stage for a reckoning that would test their loyalty, courage, and the very limits of their hope. Ada's quiet resolve burned like a fragile flame against the encroaching darkness. But the question lingered: could it survive the storm to come? The river waited, patient and relentless, its depths reflecting the fractured souls tethered to its cursed light. The hollow river was restless that night, its surface alive with flickering lights that bobbed erratically, like a constellation distorted by trembling hands. Elias stood at the water's edge, his gaze fixed on the lanterns, those spectral beacons that held the souls of the drowned. Each flicker, each sudden disappearance, felt like a sinister pulse beating beneath the water's dark skin. Ada stood beside him, her dark eyes reflecting the chaotic glow with a mix of fear and determination. "They're more agitated tonight," she whispered, voice barely carrying above the susurrus of the restless river. Elias nodded, his weathered face tight with tension. "The curse is waking," he murmured, "and it's hungry." Behind them, the faint light from their small home barely pushed back the encroaching night. Mara's frail form was visible through the window, her pale hands clutching a candle as she muttered prayers into the darkening room. The family's burden weighed heavier than ever on her, the years of loss and fear etched into the lines of her delicate face. In the village, whispers had grown into murmurs, and murmurs into rumors. Folks gathered in small clusters near the square, casting uneasy glances toward the glowing river. Old Tom, bent and weather-beaten, shuffled among them, sharing his own grim warnings with a voice hoarse from years of cautioning. Elias had heard the talk, but kept his distance, knowing that words alone would not quell what was rising. Yet, he knew the time was near when action must be taken, when the ritual would demand more than the usual offerings. Ada's fingers tightened around the worn leather cover of the journal she had found her, vessel of secrets and sorrow that had fueled her growing understanding of the curse's depth. "We can't let this continue," she said softly, meeting Elias's gaze. "There has to be a way to end it." He looked at his daughter, seeing the fierce hope burning within her despite the shadows gathering around them. "We'll face it together," he promised, voice steady but low, "whatever it takes." As the night deepened, the river's surface grew turbulent. The lanterns flickered violently, some sputtering out only to reignite moments later, their ghostly light casting long, wavering shadows on the water and the faces of those who dared watch. The drowned were restless, their demand rising. A sudden chill swept over the riverbank, carrying with it whispers faint, spectral voices that seemed to crawl through the dark and curl around the bones of the living. Ada shivered but stood firm, her hand finding Elias's. The bond between them was a fragile shield against the encroaching dread. Inside the house, Mara's whispered prayers faltered as a cold wind rattled the window panes. She pressed a trembling hand to her chest, the weight of the curse threatening to crush what little strength remained. Outside, the village held its breath. The rising tide of the drowned spirits was no longer a distant threat, but an immediate peril drawing nearer with each flickering light lost to the river's depths. Elias and Ada prepared their small boat, securing lanterns and gathering talismans old Tom had entrusted them with. The air was thick with salt and sorrow, the scent of wet earth and ancient water mixing with the faint metallic temps of fear. "This is the night," Elias said, voice low and resolute. "We carry the past on our shoulders, but tonight we fight for the future." Ada nodded, feeling the river's cold breath on her skin as she stepped into the boat beside her father. The lanterns bobbed wildly around them, the cursed light flickering like frantic heartbeats. The river seemed alive, watching, waiting, and as they pushed off into the dark waters, the line between the living and the drowned grew thinner, fragile thread stretched taut by the rising tide. Their journey into the haunted depths had begun, and with it, the family's desperate fight against a curse older than memory. The lanterns of the hollow river would not be returned easily, and the price of failure was unthinkable. But Elias and Ada were ready to face the darkness, their bond a beacon of fragile hope against the creeping shadows. The river whispered its ancient secrets, and the night held its breath. The rising tide was upon them. Ada stepped lightly across the creaking wooden floor of old Thom's cottage, the heavy scent of damp earth and burning wood wrapping around her like a shroud. The low light from the hearth cast flickering shadows that danced across the walls, revealing shelves cluttered with ancient tomes, dried herbs, and trinkets collected from the river's edge over decades. Old Tom himself sat hunched in a worn armchair, his thick beard flecked with grey eyes, sharp despite the weight of years. "You wanted to know about the flood," he said, his voice rough as gravel yet steady. "It changed everything. The river wasn't always cursed, not until that night." He gestured toward a faded map pinned above the hearth, its edges curled and brittle. "This here is the hollow river as it was before the floodwaters came rushing down from the mountains." Ada moved closer, tracing the delicate lines with her finger. "What happened?" Tom sighed, a sound heavy with memory. "Long ago, before your family was bound by this curse, the river swelled beyond its banks. The village was caught unprepared, houses washed away, lives lost in a single, terrible night. They say the river was angry more than just nature's fury. Something unnatural stirred beneath the waters." She swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling in her chest. "And the lanterns. They say the drowned souls linger, tethered by the lanterns that once guided them home but now hold them captive," Tom explained. "Your ancestors tried to appease them, offering lanterns each year to keep the spirits at bay. But that flood, that night, marked the beginning of the curse." Ada's eyes dropped to the map again, her fingers trembling slightly. Was there any way to stop it, to end this? Old Tom's gaze softened, a rare flicker of hope piercing the gloom. "There might be. The old law speaks of a sacrifice, not just of gifts, but of blood and will. A reckoning at the river's edge." Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faintest sound of water lapping against the shore. Ada felt the chill settle deep in her bones. She looked up, catching the faint glow of lanterns bobbing on the river, their light flickering as if in response to the stories unfolding within the cottage walls. "We have to try," she whispered, her voice barely audible. For Mara, for Father, for all of us. Old Tom nodded grimly. The path won't be easy, Ada, but knowing the past is the first step toward reclaiming the future. As the fire crackled low and the night deepened outside, Ada felt the fragile thread of hope tighten around her heart. Even as the shadows lengthened and the river's cursed light continued to flicker with restless intent, the past was no longer a distant memory, was a summons, pulling her into the depths of a legacy she could no longer ignore. She reached for the journal she had found days ago, its pages now heavy with new understanding. The river's secrets were unraveling, and with them, the fate of her family and the hollow river itself. The candlelight flickered weakly in the small, cramped room where Mara lay, her breath shallow and uneven. Elias sat beside her, his large, calloused hands trembling as they gently clasped her frail fingers. The years of hardship were etched deep into his weathered face, the lines of worry, guilt, and exhaustion carved by the relentless burden of the curse that haunted their family. Outside, the wind whispered through the cracks in the walls, carrying with it the faint, mournful murmur of the hollow river. It was a sound both familiar and dreadful, a reminder that the boundary between their world and the drowned souls was growing thinner by the hour. Mara's pale face was almost translucent in the dim candlelight, her soft features slack with illness. She had always been the gentle heart of the family, patient and loving even as the years wore down her strength. Now, sickness gripped her like a shadow, sapping the light from her eyes. Her whispered prayers filled the room, barely audible but persistent, as if clinging to some fragile hope. Elias glanced toward the window, where the river's cursed glow seeped through the curtains like a living thing. He felt the weight of the unseen eyes watching them, the drowned, restless and hungry, pressing closer to reclaim what was theirs. The disappearance of the lanterns had already begun to unravel their fragile peace, and now the manifestations grew stronger, more tangible. Just the night before, a pale, waterlogged figure had been glimpsed near the edge of the riverbank, its glowing eyes piercing the darkness. Ada stood at the river's edge that evening, the spectral lanterns bobbing like restless stars on the water's surface. The mist curled and twisted around her slender legs, cool and damp against her skin. The lantern's eerie light reflected in her dark eyes, mirroring the depths of the river itself. She felt the pull of the water, a cold embrace that seemed to reach out for her. Suddenly, the surface broke, silently as a figure emerged, pale and dripping, its eyes glowing with a mournful intensity. Ada froze, heart pounding, caught between fascination and terror. The drowned had crossed the threshold, their presence undeniable and close. Back in the house, Elias moved with quiet purpose. He knelt near the hearth, placing a lantern carefully on the stone floor. His voice was low, murmuring prayers passed down through generations, words meant to hold back the darkness, to keep the spirits at bay. But the air was thick with anticipation, charged and heavy. Shadows flickered unnaturally at the edges of the room, twisting and writhing like living things. Elias's gaze darted nervously toward the corners where the waterlogged shapes seemed to gather, waiting. The tension within the family mounted. Ada confronted Elias in the kitchen one evening, her voice trembling but resolute. "We can't just wait for this to end, Father. The curse is tightening its grip. If we don't act, it will take more than just lanterns next time." Elias's jaw clenched. "I know," he admitted, eyes dark with fear and guilt. "But every step we take feels like walking deeper into the river's cold embrace." Mara's frailty weighed on them both, a living testament to the curse's toll. Outside, A faint splash echoed from the river, followed by the brief flicker of a lost lantern's glow beyond the window. The sound sent a shiver through the room, a stark reminder that the drowned were no longer content to remain distant shadows. As the night deepened, the family's desperation grew. Elias vowed silently to confront the curse head-on, unwilling to lose Mara or Ada to the depths. Ada, fueled by a fierce determination born of grief and hope, prepared to delve deeper into the secrets that bound them all. But the river was unforgiving, and the drowned more relentless than ever. Outside, the cursed light of the hollow river flickered ominously, as if echoing the mounting dread that consumed the family. The line between life and death blurred, and with each passing moment, the curse tightened its grip, drawing them inexorably toward a fate as cold and dark as the river itself. The family's fight had only just begun, and the night whispered of sacrifices yet to come. Elias stared out into the darkness, the weight of ancestral guilt heavy on his shoulders. "We will end this," he vowed, "or we will all be claimed by the river's cold embrace." But the river's secrets were ancient and cruel, and the drowned were patient. The glow outside dimmed, flickered, and then steadied, as if watching and waiting for the next move. And in the shadows, the drowned waited too, their eyes glowing with a terrible hunger that no ritual could set. The curse was tightening, and the family had nowhere left to run. The night held its breath, and the river whispered its dark promise once more. The evening settled over the hollow river like a thick, suffocating shroud, the sky a muted canvas of greys and deepening blues. Inside their small, weathered home, perched precariously on the riverbank, Elias moved with a solemnity born of years spent bound to the river's ancient curse. His hands, rough and steady, carefully arranged the lanterns on the worn wooden table. Each lantern held a flickering flame enclosed in fragile glass lanterns that carried the souls of the drowned. Souls Elias and his family were sworn to return annually to the river's cold embrace. Ada watched from the shadowed corner, her dark eyes reflecting the lantern light as it danced across the peeling walls. The ritual had always been a somber affair, but this year the air felt heavier, the silence pressing in with a weight that made her skin crawl. Mara sat nearby, her pale hands busy lighting a candle, her eyes distant and haunted. The flickering flames cast long, trembling shadows that seemed to twist and stretch unnaturally in the low light. Elias's voice broke the silence. "We must be ready before night falls. The river waits, and the souls cannot linger longer than they must." Ada nodded, but her heart pounded with a restless unease. Strange things had been happening, lanterns disappearing, whispers echoing near the water's edge, and an icy chill that no fire could chase away. She felt drawn to the river in a way she couldn't explain, as if the water itself was calling her. As the family prepared to leave, Elias took the first lantern, the glass gleaming faintly in the fading light. One by one, they gathered their burdens, stepping into the damp night air that smelled of moss and decay. The river's surface shimmered with the soft glow of countless lanterns bobbing like restless stars. But then a sudden, shattering silence. A coldness swept through the air, sharper than the autumn wind that rustled through the skeletal trees. Ada's breath caught as she glanced back toward the table inside. There, where the last lantern had rested moments before, only an empty space remained. "Father," Ada whispered, voice trembling. "One's gone." Elias's jaw tightened, eyes narrowing with a mixture of fear and anger. "Impossible," he muttered, but even as he spoke, the truth settled like a stone in his gut. The first loss, the curse was tightening its grip. Back inside, Mara clutched her candle, her knuckles white with tension. The absence of that lantern was not just a missing light. It was a silent scream, a warning that the drowned were no longer content to wait. Ada's resolve solidified in that moment. No longer a passive observer, she would fight to end the curse, to save her family from the river's cold, unyielding grasp. But Elias, burdened by years of fear and guilt, warned her against rashness. The river's depths hold horrors beyond your imagining, Ada. We must be cautious. Their words hung heavy in the air as the river whispered just beyond the window pane, the lantern's stolen glow swallowed by the encroaching night. The family stood on the precipice of a terror that threatened to drag them all beneath the surface. And somewhere in the dark water, the drowned watched, their eyes glowing with a hunger that would not be denied. The night had only just begun. The river's edge was a place of uneasy silence, broken only by the gentle lapping of water against the worn wooden docks. Ada stood alone, the cool night air biting at her skin as she peered into the inky blackness where the lantern should have floated. But the lantern was gone, stolen by the unseen hands of the drowned. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a wild rhythm that echoed the unrest stirring beneath the surface. The gentle glow of the other lanterns seemed dimmer now, as if the river itself mourned the loss. Ada wrapped her arms around herself, the chill that gripped her deeper than the autumn breeze. She knew what this meant. The curse was no longer a distant threat, but an active force, reaching out from the depths to claim what was owed. "Why now?" she whispered to the dark water, voice barely audible. "What do you want from us?" A sudden movement caught her ardor flicker just beneath the surface, pale and spectral. She blinked, heart leaping, but the figure vanished like a disturbed shadow. The drowned were watching, waiting. Ada's fear twisted into determination. She would no longer stand by. Whatever it took, she would find a way to stop this nightmare. Back in the cramped kitchen, Elias's voice was low and urgent as he turned to Ada. "This isn't just about lanterns anymore. They're growing bolder. If we lose any more, the river will come for us." Ada met his gaze, eyes aflame with defiance. "Then we fight. We find a way to end this, Father. We can't keep living in fear." Elias's face tightened, a mixture of pride and worry shadowing his features. "I've faced this curse all my life, Ada. It's not so simple. The river's power runs deep, and the drowned are relentless. But doing nothing is worse," Ada said firmly. "We have to act, before it's too late." Their words hung between them, charged with the tension of a family torn between hope and despair. The night deepened, the hearth's glow casting flickering light over Mara's pale face. She sat quietly, candle in hand, eyes closed as if trying to will away the darkness that pressed against their home. The missing lantern's absence was a wound that ached in the silence. Elias sat beside her, his hand resting gently on hers, a silent promise of protection. But even he could not hide the fear that gnawed at his heart, the fear that the river's curse would demand a price none of them could pay. Outside, the lanterns on the hollow river bobbed and swayed, their spectral light flickering against the night. Somewhere beneath the water, the drowned waited, their hunger unquenched. The first loss had been claimed, and the river would not rest until all were taken. As the family prepared to face the coming days, the weight of the stolen lantern pressed heavily upon them. Ada's mind raced with questions and plans, but one truth was clear. The curse was no longer a distant shadow, but a looming storm they had to confront. Elias's warning echoed in her ears, but so did the river's call, a call she could no longer ignore. The fight for their souls had begun. The lanterns on the hollow river flickered, their cursed light casting long shadows over the water. And in the depths, the drowned stirred, ready to reclaim what was theirs. The night was far from over. The night wrapped itself around the hollow river like a thick, suffocating shroud as Ada and Lena stood at the water's edge. The moon was nowhere to be seen, swallowed by heavy clouds that choked the sky, leaving only the faint glow of lanterns bobbing like restless stars across the river's surface. Their light shimmered and danced, casting eerie reflections that seemed to twist and writhe with a life of their own. Ada's breath came in shallow gasps, her eyes fixed on the glowing orbs tethered to the dark water, each one a beacon for a lost soul bound by the river's ancient curse. "Are you sure we shouldn't wait until morning?" Lena whispered, her voice barely audible over the gentle lapping of water against the muddy bank. Ada shook her head, her resolve hardening. "If the lanterns are disappearing during the night, that's when we need to be here. We have to understand what's happening before it's too late." They moved cautiously along the riverbank, their footsteps muffled by the soft mud and fallen leaves. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and decaying vegetation, mingling with a sharp tang of something metallic and old, like rusted iron or dried blood. Ada's heart thudded painfully in her chest, the weight of the family's burden pressing down on her with every step. Lena shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around her frame. "I don't like this, Ada. It feels like the river is watching us." Ada glanced over her shoulder, the shadows between the trees seeming to shift and pulse. Maybe it is. Their flashlights pierced the darkness in narrow beams, revealing tangled roots and discarded debris along the bank. Suddenly, Ada's light caught on something half buried in the mud, a small wooden box. Its edges rounded and softened by years of water and rot. Kneeling down, she brushed away the damp earth, revealing warped planks darkened by time. "What is it?" Lena asked, leaning in closer. Ada's fingers trembled as she pried the box open. Inside lay brittle bones wrapped in fraying, water-stained cloth, alongside rusted trinkets and old coin. A twisted ring, a shard of faded cloth embroidered with a symbol she recognized from the family's lore. Her stomach churned with revulsion and sorrow. "These are offerings," Ada whispered, her voice breaking. "From long ago, sacrifices made to keep the curse at bay." Lena swallowed hard, her bright eyes wide with shock. Why didn't anyone tell us about this? Ada closed the box carefully, a cold weight settling over her chest. Because no one wanted to remember. Because remembering means facing the truth. They pressed on, following the river's curve until they reached an ancient tree, its twisted roots clawing at the soil like skeletal fingers. Carved deep into the bark were strange symbols, worn and faded but still unmistakably deliberate. Ada traced the grooves with her fingertips, feeling a faint pulse, as if the markings were alive beneath her skin. "These are the same symbols in my ancestors' journal," she said, voice low and reverent. "They speak of the curse and the souls trapped beneath the water." Lena shivered. It's like the river itself is alive, and it's angry. A sudden chill swept through the clearing, carrying with it mournful wails that seemed to echo from the depths below. The lanterns on the river bobbed violently, their light flickering and twisting in unnatural patterns. Shadows flickered at the edge of their vision pale, waterlogged forms that vanished when looked at directly. "We need to go," Ada said urgently, grabbing Lena's arm. "This isn't just about missing lanterns anymore. It's about the souls trapped here and the terrible price they demand." As they hurried away from the riverbank, the cold embrace of the night seemed to tighten around them, carrying the whispered secrets of the drowned and the haunting promise of sacrifice yet to come. Ada's mind raced with questions, and with the growing certainty that the family's ritual was only one thread in a much darker tapestry. The river was not done with them yet, and neither was the curse. The sun had long surrendered to the horizon when Ada and Lena finally returned to the village. Their clothes damp and faces pale from the night's chilling discoveries. The weight of what they had uncovered settled heavily between them, a silence thick with unspoken fears. "We have to tell Elias," Ada said at last, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "He needs to know what's really beneath the surface." Lena nodded, though her eyes flickered with doubt. "Are you sure he'll listen?" Ada hesitated, remembering the stoic, guarded man her father was burdened by guilt, reluctant to confront the darkness he'd long tried to deny. But if the curse was growing stronger, if the river demanded more than just lanterns this year, they had no choice but to face it together. As they parted ways, Ada's gaze drifted back to the glowing river in the distance, the lanterns flickering like stars swallowed by the night. She could almost hear the whispers, again ancient voices, calling her deeper into the mystery, urging her to uncover the truth before it was too late. The river held its secrets tight, but Ada was determined to pull them into the light, no matter the cost. Inside the dim confines of Elias's small home, the flickering candlelight cast trembling shadows on the walls as Ada laid the wooden box on the worn table. Elias looked down at the remnants of the past, the bones, the trinkets, the symbols of sacrifice, and his weathered face tightened. "So, it's true," he murmured, voice heavy with resignation. "The river's hunger runs deeper than we thought." Ada met his eyes, searching for hope amidst the despair. "There has to be a way to stop it, Father. We can't keep losing more of ourselves to this curse." Elias sighed, the weight of generations pressing on his shoulders. "We'll find it, together." Outside, the river's surface shimmered once more, the lanterns bobbing, silently watching, waiting, their cursed light refusing to fade, and the hollow river whispered on. The night had fallen heavy and suffocating over the hollow river, the usual gentle murmur of water replaced by an unnatural stillness that pressed against the skin like a damp shroud. Elias stood at the riverbank, the cold seeping through his worn coat, eyes scanning the dark surface where the lanterns had once floated serenely. Tonight, they did not bob gently, they pulsed, flickered, as if the light inside them struggled to contain something vast and restless. Ada stood beside him, clutching a small lantern that cast a pale halo around her, her breath misting in the chill air. "Father, do you see that?" she whispered, voice trembling but resolute. The river's surface rippled, a sickly green luminescence breaking through the darkness like veins of ghostly fire. Elias nodded grimly. "They're coming." From the depths, pale shapes began to surface, waterlogged and spectral, their bodies dripping and glistening under the lantern light that seemed to cling to their forms like cursed flames. Their eyes hollow orbs, glowing with an unearthly light, locked onto the living with a hunger that twisted the air. The village lay quiet, the only sound the soft lapping of water and the distant rustle of leaves. But the silence was deceptive. As the drowned rose, so too did the whispers faint at first, then swelling into a chorus of mournful, desperate voices that echoed through the night, clawing at the edges of sanity. Elias tightened his grip on his lantern, feeling the weight of generations bearing down on his shoulders. "We have to protect the lanterns," he said, voice low but fierce. "If they take even one, the curse deepens." Ada's gaze hardened. "Then we fight." Behind them, Mara watched from the window, her frail figure silhouetted against the flickering candlelight. Her eyes, wide with fear and sorrow, followed the rising tide of drowned souls. She whispered prayers into the cold air, hoping against hope that the ancient ritual would hold. But tonight, the river demanded more. The drowned advanced, their movements slow and unnatural, as if dragged by chains hidden beneath the water. Their lanterns cast eerie shadows that danced on the village walls, faces twisted by torment and longing. One reached out, fingers elongated and dripping with water, grasping toward the lanterns the family held. Elias stepped forward, voice ringing out over the river's eerie glow. "Back. You will take nothing tonight." A ripple of resistance passed through the spirits, their glowing eyes flaring in reply. Ada moved swiftly beside her father, brandishing her lantern like a beacon of fragile hope. The air thickened, charged with an ancient, terrible power, the boundary between the living and the dead thinning to a fragile membrane. The river's cursed, light pulsed like a heartbeat. Each flicker a reminder of the price long ago paid and the price yet to come. As the drowned pressed closer, Elias and Ada stood united, the weight of their ancestors and the fate of their family hanging in the balance. The night was alive with foreboding dread. The river's lanterns, no longer mere lights on the water, but the last line between salvation and oblivion, and the battle for the hollow river had begun. The first touch of the drowned was like ice seeping into bone. Elias felt the chill as a spectral hand brushed his arm, cold and clammy, but he held fast. "Not tonight," he growled, stepping forward with fierce determination. Ada's lantern flared bright, casting a circle of golden light that pushed back the darkness. She met the gaze of a drowned figure whose eyes glowed with an unbearable sadness. "Why do you haunt us?" she demanded, voice strong despite the tremor beneath. The figure's lips parted, whispering words lost to the wind, a lament of betrayal and suffering. Ada's heart ached with the weight of their sorrow, but she knew the truth. They were trapped, bound to the curse by the failures of those who came before. Behind them, the village stirred. Curtains twitched, dogs barked nervously, and Mara's pale face appeared at the window, eyes wide with terror. "Elias, be careful," she whispered, voice cracking with fear. He nodded, but did not waver. "We end this tonight, for her, for all of us." The drowned surged a tide of cold and light, their lanterns flickering wildly as if reflecting the storm of rage and despair within them. The river seemed to rise, water slapping against the banks with growing fury. Ada gripped her lantern tighter, drawing strength from the fragile flame. She glanced at her father, seeing in his steady eyes the fierce love that had carried their family through years of darkness. Together, they faced the rising of the drowned, the cursed light illuminating the boundary between life and death, and the desperate fight to reclaim their future from the depths of the past. The night was far from over. The room was thick with a heavy silence, broken only by the occasional crackle of the dying fire in the hearth. Elias sat, hunched and lean, his hands clasped tightly as if trying to hold on to the last fragments of his resolve. His eyes, deep-set and shadowed from years of worry, scanned the flickering light that barely illuminated the worn wooden walls of their home. Outside, the river whispered its restless sound that had haunted his family for generations. Ada sat beside him, her slender frame tense but steady. The flickering shadows played across her dark hair, and her eyes, reflecting the river's depths, held a fierce determination that belied her youth. "Father," she whispered, her voice soft but urgent, "we cannot wait any longer. The river is growing darker, the lanterns fading. If we do not act, the curse will consume us all." Elias nodded slowly, the weight of years pressing down on his shoulders. "I know," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "I have tried to keep the rituals, to protect you both, but this is different. The river demands more now. From the next room came the faint sound of a match striking and the soft glow of a candle being lit. Mara's pale face appeared in the doorway, her soft features etched with exhaustion and fear. Her tired eyes met Elias's, a silent plea lingering in their depths. The frailty she now bore was a cruel reflection of the family's dwindling hope. "I will not watch this family be torn apart," Elias declared, rising with a sudden vigor that startled Ada. "Tonight, I will go to the river. I will face the curse, and if it takes me, I will ensure it cannot harm you or Mara any longer." Ada's heart quickened, a mix of fear and pride swelling within her. "I am coming with you," she said firmly. "We face this together." Mara stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Be careful," she implored. "The river's cold embrace is unforgiving." Night fell swiftly, wrapping the village in a cloak of shadow and silence. The river, a dark ribbon winding through the landscape, glowed faintly with the spectral light of the cursed lanterns. Some flickered weakly, others had vanished altogether, swallowed by the mist that seemed alive with secrets. At the riverbank, Elias and Ada prepared their small wooden boat. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, the oppressive quiet broken only by the gentle lapping of water against the hull. Lanterns bobbed on the surface, their cursed light pulsing like heartbeat in eerie rhythm that sent shivers down Ada's spine. Elias handed Ada a coil of rope and a small iron talisman, worn smooth by generations of use. "This belonged to my father," he said. "It will protect us, or at least, it will remind us why we fight." Ada nodded, gripping the talisman tightly. As Elias pushed the boat into the cold current, the mist curled around them like spectral fingers, and the river seemed to hold its breath. Their breaths came out in visible puffs, mingling with the chill night air. Every sound amplified in the silence: a distant owl, the creak of wood, the soft splash of oars. The lantern's glow flickered violently, casting ghostly shadows that danced on the water. Shapes flickered just beneath the surface pale, waterlogged figures with glowing eyes, watching, waiting. Ada's heart pounded, but she refused to look away. "We must reach the old bend," Elias said, his voice low and steady. "There, the curse's heart beats strongest. We face it, or we all drown in its shadow." The boat drifted deeper into the river's embrace, the cursed light dimming ominously. Each stroke of the oar pushed them closer to the unknown, the boundary between life and death blurring with every passing moment. Ada glanced back toward the shore, where the faint light of their home flickered like a fragile beacon. "We have no choice," she whispered. "We must end this. For Mara, for us all." Elias reached out, taking her hand, briefly a silent vow shared between them before the river swallowed their path in darkness. As the boat crept forward, the water around them began to ripple unnaturally, and the chilling whispers of the drowned rose on the wind. The desperate measures they had taken were only the beginning, the first step into a darkness that would test every fiber of their courage and love. The night held its breath, and the river waited. The night had settled over the hollow river like a cloak woven of shadows and whispered fears. Lanterns, those spectral beacons bobbing on the water's surface, flickered erratically, their cursed light casting eerie reflections that danced with unnatural life. Elias stood at the riverbank, his weathered hands clenched tightly around a worn wooden lantern, eyes fixed on the restless water. Beside him, Ada's dark hair clung damply to her face, her gaze sharp and unyielding despite the cold that seeped into her bones. "It's here," Elias murmured, voice rough as gravel. "The river's wrath, the curse itself." Ada nodded, swallowing the lump of fear rising in her throat. The stories she'd uncovered in the hidden journal, the whispered warnings of old Tom, all led to this moment. The boundary between life and death was thinning. The drowned souls seeking to reclaim what was lost, their lanterns, their essence, their release. A sudden ripple disturbed the water's surface. Pale figures emerged, waterlogged and spectral, their glowing eyes fixated on the two standing defiant on the shore. The air grew thick with the scent of brine and decay, a coldness that seemed to reach deep into the marrow. Ada's breath hitched as a translucent hand reached from the mist, fingers curling as if to grasp her very soul. She stepped back, heart pounding, but Elias's steady presence anchored her. "Remember the words," he said, voice a low chant rising with the night wind. Together, they recited the incantations of their ancestors, words heavy with history and power. The spectral lanterns on the river flared bright, illuminating the twisted forms of the drowned as they writhed against the invisible bonds that held them. Their cries were silent but deafening, a cacophony of sorrow and rage. Water surged, swirling around Elias's boots, icy and unrelenting. Another hand grasped at Ada's ankle, cold as the grave. She clenched her fists, drawing strength from the memory of her mother, lost to this very curse, and from the fierce determination to save her family. "We won't let you take us," Elias growled, voice breaking through the spectral tempest. Not this time. The river seemed to pulse, its heartbeat a dreadful drum that echoed in their chests. Lanterns flickered wildly, the cursed light wavering between life and death. Then, with a sudden, explosive flare, the spirits recoiled, retreating beneath the turbulent surface. The water stilled, the haunted glow dimming to a faint shimmer. Ada collapsed onto the damp earth, breath ragged but triumphant. Elias sank beside her, eyes scanning the now quiet river. For a moment, relief washed over them like a bomb. Then, the crushing weight of what was to come settled back in. "This isn't over," Elias whispered. "The curse is stronger than ever, but we've made our stand." Ada nodded, resolve hardening within her. The river's edge had been a battleground, the line between worlds blurred and crossed. They had faced the darkness and survived, but the lanterns of the hollow river still flickered, waiting. As the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, the river lay calm once more, hiding the restless souls beneath its surface. Elias and Ada rose, shadows among shadows, bound by blood and burden, their fight far from finished. The night had tested them, but the river demanded more, and they would answer whatever the cost. The night had fallen thick and heavy over the hollow river, its waters shimmering faintly with the cursed light that had tormented the family for generations. Elias stood at the river's edge, the cold biting through his worn boots as he gripped the handle of the last lantern tightly. Beside him, Ada's breath came out in visible puffs, her dark eyes reflecting the flickering flames that danced nervously in the evening breeze. Mara remained a few steps behind, seated on a rough-hewn log, clutching a candle close to her chest, whispering prayers that tangled with the sound of the restless river. The air was thick with tension, the very atmosphere trembling with the presence of the drowned. Pale, waterlogged figures emerged like phantoms from the mist, their glowing eyes fixed unblinkingly on the lanterns. Their forms flickered and swayed, neither fully solid nor entirely absent. They whispered in voices that echoed like distant waves breaking on forgotten shores, voices laced with sorrow and fury, demanding what was rightfully theirs. Elias swallowed hard, the weight of the family's burden pressing down on him like a stone. Years of silence, fear, and resigned duty had led to this moment. The ritual was simple in its design, but wrought with pain. Each lantern held the soul of a drowned, a light tethering them to the world. To return them was to grant release, but at a cost no living heart could bear lightly. Ada stepped forward, placing her hand gently on Elias's arm. "We have to finish this," she said, her voice steady despite the cold that crept under her skin. "For Mara, for all of us." He nodded, feeling the surge of protective desperation that had replaced his old skepticism. Together, they waded into the river, the icy water rising swiftly to their knees, sending shivers deep into their bones. Around them, the drowned circled, their whispers growing louder, more insistent, a chorus of lament and longing. Elias lifted the first lantern, its glow warm against the chill night. He lowered it carefully into the water, watching as the flame flickered, then steadied, the light sinking beneath the surface. The spectral figures surged forward, reaching out with translucent hands, their faces a mixture of yearning and relief. A soft wail escaped the river, an eerie lament that resonated in Elias's chest. Ada followed, her movements precise despite the tremor in her fingers. She placed her lantern down, eyes never leaving the water as the light faded below, drawing the attention of the nearest drowned spirit. The figure's glowing eyes met hers, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. In that gaze, Ada saw not just menace, but a profound loneliness, a tragic tether to a past that could not be undone. Back on the bank, Mara's whispers rose in a fragile chant, her candlelight flickering in tandem with the lanterns on the water. Her pale face was etched with both hope and dread, the lines of suffering made sharper by the dim glow. Though frail, she lifted her voice as though it could reach beyond the veil separating the living from the dead. The final lantern trembled in Elias's hands. He hesitated, feeling the full gravity of what he was about to do. This last light represented not just a soul, but the family's collective guilt and hope. With a steadying breath, he released it into the river. The cursed light flared violently, illuminating the faces of the drowned as they cried out in unison, a sound like the breaking of chains and the sigh of long-held grief. Slowly, their forms began to dissolve, melting into mist and shadow until only the soft ripple of the water remained. The river's glow dimmed, sinking into darkness as if the very curse had been drawn back into the depths. Elias and Ada climbed out of the river, dripping and exhausted, their hearts heavy but unburdened. Mara rose unsteadily, embracing them both, the fragile hope in her eyes, a fragile thread binding them together. The family stood in silence, the weight of their sacrifice settling around them like the cold night air. The river no longer glowed with the cursed light, but the scars of the past lingered etched deep into their souls. They knew the peace might be fleeting, a fragile reprieve in an ancient battle between life and death. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the hollow river lay still and dark, a silent witness to the sacrifices made. And though the lanterns were gone, their memory burned in the hearts of those who survived, and in the quiet depths where the drowned once whispered their sorrow. Yet beneath the calm surface, a faint flicker danced a reminder that some debts are never fully paid, and some lights never truly fade. The morning broke over the hollow river with a lightness it had not known for many moons. Elias stood at the riverbank, the cold dampness of the earth pressing beneath his boots, his gaze fixed on the water's surface. The lanterns, once so bright and numerous, now flickered weakly, their cursed glow fading into a mere shimmer that seemed almost reluctant to disappear. The river, so long a source of dread and binding curse, seemed to exhale a quiet sigh, its restless agitation stilled for now. He felt the weight of the night's horrors pressing down upon his shoulders, yet beneath it was a fragile glimmer of relief. The curse that had haunted his family for generations had been quelled at least for the time being. Behind him, the house stirred. Inside, Ada and Mara sat close together in the dim room, the flicker of a single candle casting long shadows across their pale faces. Mara's hands trembled as she reached out, seeking Ada's warmth and reassurance. Ada, though still young, bore the hardened look of someone who had seen too much. Her dark eyes, reflecting the depths of the river itself, held a mixture of sorrow and determination. They spoke no words at first, their silence a shared language of grief and fragile hope. "It's over," Ada whispered finally, her voice barely carrying beyond the walls. "For now," Mara nodded, tears welling but unfallen. "But the river will remember. We will remember." Outside, the soft crunch of footsteps announced old Tom's arrival. He leaned heavily on his cane as he approached the porch, his weather-beaten face etched with lines that told stories of countless winters and even more warnings. His beard, thick and tangled, seemed almost to blend with the shadows of the early light. "I see the river's calm," old Tom said quietly, his voice gravelly but steady. "But peace such as this is a fragile thing. It rests on a knife's edge, as always." Elias looked at him, eyes tired yet alert. "Is it truly over?" he asked. Old Tom's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Over? No, never over. Not while the river flows and the lanterns glow. But there is silence now. A chance to breathe before the shadows stir again." The family stood together in the morning chill, the weight of their ordeal pressing in yet softened by the dawn's gentle light. The village around them slowly awoke, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge the supernatural storm that had passed through their lives. The river's surface reflected the pastel pinks and blues of the sky, a serene mask over the horrors that had unfolded beneath its depths. Elias felt the ache of loss deep within his chest, the absence of those who had been claimed by the river, the sacrifices made, the fractures in their family that might never fully heal. Yet amidst the sorrow was a seed of something new, hope. A hope born not from ignorance or denial, but from the hard-fought understanding that some battles, though won, leave scars that shape the future. Ada stepped forward, her gaze meeting her father's. "We survived," she said softly, "and that means there's still a tomorrow." "Yes," Elias replied, the faintest of smiles touching his lips. "Tomorrow, and whatever comes with it." As the lantern's last glimmers faded into the river's embrace, the family turned away from the water, stepping back toward their home, a place forever changed, like themselves, but still a refuge. The hollow river was silent now, but its memory lingered, a haunting reminder of the price of survival and the enduring power of ancestral curses. And so they faced the new day, carrying the weight of the past and the fragile promise of the future, their hearts heavy yet unbroken. The first light of dawn crept quietly over the hollow river, brushing the water with a faint, pale tint that seemed almost hesitant to chase away the night. Elias stood alone at the riverbank, the cool earth damp beneath his worn boots, his gaze fixed on the water's surface. The lanterns, once countless and glowing like restless stars, were now gone. The cursed light that had haunted their lives for so long flickered for the last time in the depths, swallowed by the quiet mist that swirled just above the river's glassy skin. He breathed deeply, the air sharp and cool in his lungs, a mixture of relief and annoying sorrow weighing heavily inside him. The river was silent now, no longer echoing with restless whispers or the soft bobbing of spectral lanterns. But silence carried its own burden, a heavy stillness, as if the very water mourned the loss of its own ancient torment. Behind him, the porch light flickered as Ada stepped out, a single lantern cradled gently in her hands. Her dark hair was tousled by a soft breeze, and her eyes, deep and searching, mirrored the river's depths she had come to know so intimately. She moved with a quiet grace, placing the lantern carefully on the wooden railing, its warm glow cutting through the morning haze. "It's over," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. Elias nodded, but said nothing. Words felt insufficient, tangled in the web of grief and relief that wrapped around them both. They had survived the curse, yes, but at a cost that no ritual or sacrifice could ever erase. Inside the house, Mara sat near the window, a fragile silhouette wrapped in a thin shawl. The years of fear and loss had worn her down, but her eyes held a softness that belied her frailty. She hummed an old lullaby, a melody that once filled the home with warmth and hope. Her fingers traced the petals of wildflowers she had gathered from the gardener, small act of life amid the shadows of death. The family gathered slowly, drawn by the quiet light of the fading lantern. The room was dim, the air thick with memories and unspoken pain. They sat close, a fragile circle of strength in the face of the darkness that had threatened to consume them. There were no grand words, no promises of easy days ahead, only the shared understanding that life would never be the same. Ada's gaze met her father's. "We did what we had to," she said, the conviction in her voice tempered by the weight of everything they had lost. Elias reached out, his rough hand covering hers. "And we remember," he replied. "The river may be quiet, but the lanterns, they're still with us." Outside, the hollow river flowed on, its surface calm and unbroken. The cursed light had dimmed, but the memory of the drowned lingered like a shadow beneath the water, an eternal reminder of the cost of survival and the fragile line between the living and the dead. As the sun rose higher, the family sat together in silence, the fragile hope of a new day settling over them like a tentative promise. The river had been stilled, but the story was far from over. In the quiet moments between grief and healing, the lanterns of memory burned softly, a haunting light to guide them through the darkness yet to come. The river remained silent, yet the weight of ancestral guilt and love wove itself into the fabric of their lives. And in that silence, they found a measure of peace, fragile, uncertain, but real. But as the water lapped gently against the shore, a faint flicker of light, like the last breath of a candle, lingered just beneath the surface. A whisper of the past, waiting patiently for the future to unfold.